So I want to acknowledge something here at the beginning of the message. Every time we gather in this room, whether it's Thursday nights or Sunday mornings, every service, every weekend, there are two different groups of people in the room. There are those of you who are followers of Jesus. You say, this defines my life. I'm a Christian. I've experienced this salvation. And there's people in this room who are not followers of Jesus. In fact, what's happening increasingly these days is people are more and more confident in inviting their friends who are maybe struggling with faith or sorting things out, as the crowd is kind of growing around here of people who are in the room and not followers of Jesus. And you need to know that I love that. Like, if you're a follower of Jesus, this is at the center of your life and it shapes everything. If you're not a follower of Jesus, we honor the idea that you're on a journey of exploration and are really glad that you're here. Many, many times when I teach from the scriptures apply to our human lives. And so whether you're a follower of Jesus or not, the message is kind of one and the same to all of us, and it's something that can inspire us and shape us and guide us in our lives. It's powerful. But of course, every now and then, as we teach from the scriptures, there's a message that would hit followers of Jesus and people who aren't followers of Jesus in two entirely different ways. And that is part of the message tonight. There's something in it for both groups, for sure. But you'll kind of approach this in two totally different ways, and I kind of can't wait to share it with you. Now, we've been working through this series called The Original. It's all kind of walking through a historical document that a doctor named Luke wrote down to kind of describe how the original followers of Jesus lived and how that faith progressed and broke through in all of the known world. And if you've been following this with us, you know that there is not just an encouragement to share your faith if you are a follower of Jesus, but actually a commission from Jesus. Like, if you're one of my followers, now go and share this with others. Now, I don't know how that hits you today, because in our world, in American culture today, a lot of times there's a little negativity around the idea of proselytizing or evangelizing, trying to get someone to leave what they believe and come to what you believe. I don't know if you've experienced kind of the negative connotations around that, but it's a really interesting thing to me because it's a very recent cultural construct. Really, it's only in the last 50 years in Western culture that where people get highly sensitive about this proselytizing and evangelizing. All before this, for the history of the world, people had an appreciation that proselytizing and evangelizing from one faith to another was probably the most natural way to live, and actually a really healthy way to live. Why would that be? Well, it's actually not complicated at all. First of all, people really valued, and I hope that all of you still do, the pursuit of truth. To say, hey, if I'm wrong about what I believe, I would actually like to know it and move toward what is right. I tell people all the time, do I have doubts about Christianity? I do from time to time, right? I can't reconcile everything there is to reconcile about Christianity. However, I believe it because it's the most reconcilable thing I've come across. But if I found out that Christianity was not true, would I want to know that? Yes, I would. Because the pursuit of truth has value to it. And so I would never want someone to hold back on trying to persuade me that I'm wrong and there's a different way to believe. I have friends. I have friends who have had conversations with who are Hindu and who are Muslim and who are atheists, and I'm just kind of come at me, bro. Like, let's talk. Let's have this conversation because I want to know. I want to know what's true. The other thing if you stop and think about it, why would we hesitate on the proselytizing and the evangelizing ideas, is that it doesn't really make sense to do that if you've had a meaningful experience in your own faith. Like, if you've encountered something and it's given you a new life, it's given you a redemption, it's given you a freshness, it's given you something to believe, it's given you guidance, it's given you power that you didn't have before. It can't quite be that the right response to that is, but I'm not telling anybody. I'm keeping this to myself. And so I really just kind of want to open up the conversation to say, I know there's some sensitivity culturally about the idea of proselytizing or evangelizing, but it doesn't really make sense for people who want to pursue the truth or who have had a powerful encounter themselves with God in a unique way. So it might be worth asking the question, why is it that there's all this sensitivity around proselytizing or evangelizing? And I think I know the answer. It's not actually because we don't want to know what's true. It's because real life people experienced some people trying to proselytize and evangelize who did it in horrible ways. right? Like they did it in ways that were insensitive. They did it in ways that were arrogant. It was actually the approach more than the idea of persuading that causes a lot of angst around this. And so I just want to begin, before we dig into the passage in the book of Acts today, with this kind of idea. There are mistakes that followers of Jesus make when they're trying to lead others to faith. And I'm going to identify a few of them for you. Before I get to the three that are there, let me just name one that's not in your program. One of the mistakes people who are followers of Jesus make is they opt out of this, right? Because while we all probably have a picture of someone who's been obnoxious in sharing their faith or doing it in some unhealthy way, and none of us want to be that person, the only thing I think that's more lame than sharing your faith poorly is not sharing it at all, right? And so when we start to take this approach, we have to be listeners, right? Sharing your faith is not about sales. It's not about jabbing something down someone's throat. It's actually all done in the context of relationship. And unless you're listening to the other person, it's going to be really hard to have a relationship with them and talk to them about their faith. I've been on the receiving end of people of different faiths who have talked to me about theirs, and when they caricature what I believe but don't really listen to me to say, no, this is what I actually believe, I just shut them down. I think I'm not even interested in that if you won't listen to me. We've all been on the other side of a table from someone who won't listen to us. They're not very persuasive. I don't know. I feel like I should kind of show of hands here. Our family lives in a subdivision, and our subdivision has a Facebook page for the subdivision. How many of you live in a subdivision that has a Facebook page? Oh, isn't that so much fun? Because there's nice things that happen on our subdivision. I know, some of you live in my subdivision. We're going to talk about this here, okay? There's some nice things that happen. Oh, this dog was lost. Now you can find the dog, right? Lots of times there's arguments about the HOA and who's doing what and what they should and why you should build a fence or not build a fence, all these things. One of the things that continuously happens on my subdivision's Facebook page is usually it's a Saturday morning. There's a religious group that's infiltrated our subdivision, and they're going door to door. And the subdivision Facebook page is, warning, warning, you won't want to answer your door this morning. Why? Why? Well, let's just think about it. Because I've been on the receiving end of that. And usually someone had an agenda that they were pushing. They weren't caring. They weren't listening. They were just checking their boxes. It doesn't work. It's a bad approach. If you're going to share your faith, and I hope that you will, why don't you start by listening to what someone else believes instead of just pushing what you believe. Here's another mistake that people make. It is expecting 100% embrace. Right? Some people get this in their mind. They think, well, I'm not going to share my faith unless I'm sure someone's going to embrace it. And I think that you shouldn't do that, right? You should share your faith as often as you can. Some people will receive it. Some people will think about it. Some people will reject it. That's the way this works. For the people who receive it, you should love them. For the people who are going to think about it, you should love them. For the people who reject it, you should love them. You don't end the relationship, just be friends with them, right? So it's okay that not everybody embraces this. In fact, this is the storyline through the original, right? Some people embrace the faith, some people don't. We shouldn't be surprised. When Jesus told stories about this, he said, there's a man who goes out and he sows seed. The seed is the word of God. And some of the seed falls on hard soil. It never comes up. Never comes up. Some of it starts to come up and then fades out. Some of it grows and produces a great crop. That's kind of the nature of how this works. So it's perfectly okay to share your faith and not have someone embrace it and stay friends with them. That would be a beautiful, beautiful thing. In fact, Jesus himself had people who walked away from him. So don't expect 100% embrace. And here's another mistake we make, and I think this is a big deal. A lot of times people who are followers of Jesus start giving faith-based answers to fact-based questions. Someone who actually wants to have a dialogue about the truth and understanding things, they'll say, well, tell me about this, or they ask a question about science, or they're legitimate questions for someone who's trying to sort out faith. But the only answer the Christian sometimes seems to have is, because the Bible says so, or you just have to believe. I think That's a pretty terrible answer. To someone who has legitimate questions that are rooted in logic and reason and science, like you ought to give fact-based answers to fact-based questions and give faith-based answers to faith-based questions, but don't try to give faith-based answers to fact-based questions. And this is actually where we end up in the passage through the book of Acts tonight. So if you were with us last week, you know that Paul has been making this really long journey all over Asia Minor, and he ended up in a few major cities. He ended up last week, we left him in Athens, in Greece. And when he's in Athens, Paul takes a very interesting approach. He starts to walk around the city. He starts to observe that people are worshiping all kinds of things. There's statues, there's temples that have been built all over the place. And I mean, Greek mythology is a thing. Athens is kind of a center of the academy, of the university, of the intellectual center. And the scriptures actually say that Paul went into the temple, as he always did, to reason with Jewish people. And then he went into the marketplace. But when it says marketplace in Athens, it probably doesn't mean like a buy and sell and trade marketplace. It probably means the marketplace of ideas. That's what Athens was known for. And actually, in the midst of this conversation, he's in this marketplace, and the scriptures tell us that the two different kind of philosophical groups, the Stoics and the Epicureans, are kind of fascinated by what he's saying, challenged by what he's saying. He's engaged them in such a way that they, get this, they invite him into their conversation. So I want you to think about this just for a moment. Follow this. When we lead smart people toward faith, and you'd be like, Greg, my brother-in-law is dumb. What do I do with him? Well, that's another sermon. This one's for the smart people, okay? When you're trying to lead someone who's smart, who cares about intellectual things, who uses their brain, who values science and reason and philosophy, there are certain ways to go about that. And what Paul does for us is he gives us both the reasons someone might believe and the approach that you might take if you're trying to engage people who are smart. Now, here's where the roads diverge, whether you're a follower of Jesus or not a follower of Jesus. For those of you who are followers of Jesus, over the next few minutes, I'm going to describe this, and I think it's kind of an equipping experience for all of us. We can kind of look at this and say, yeah, I haven't taken that approach before. Now I know in a healthy way how I would go about leading people who are smart to faith. And if you're someone who's not a follower of Jesus, I mean, there's a lot of reasons that people don't follow Jesus. I mean, think about this. I think in the last 3 weeks, I've had a conversation with people who aren't followers of Jesus. One of them, the reason they didn't follow was because of a religious experience they had as a child, their church experience. As a child, it pushed them away rather than helping them to embrace the faith. Another person, just being honest, I think he would say this too, the reason he's not a follower of Jesus is because he doesn't want to change his lifestyle. If he was to embrace what he might even believe is actually true, it does mean he'd have to make different decisions in his life. He doesn't really want to do that. He'd have to change the lifestyle. Some people don't follow Jesus because there's been suffering in their experience and they have some significant questions for God. They're kind of personal questions for God. And there's a whole crowd that struggles to follow Jesus because to them it doesn't make sense. There's an intellectual barrier, and they don't want to be caught on just the faith-based side of an intellectual barrier if Christianity can't at least hold its own weight, if it isn't defensible from an intellectual standpoint. And so Paul walks into this environment, into kind of the center of the marketplace of ideas, where the greatest academics and philosophers were, and he says, let's have a conversation about this. What does he do? Well, first, he creates a dialogue. And the dialogue is not based on what he wants to say first, but instead it's based on their perspective. This is just listening. He actually took a walk around the city, and before he came in on his high horse announcing what he believes is true, he says, why don't I take a look at what they're resonating with these days? Why don't I listen to their poets and their philosophers and then try to figure out, hey, maybe I have something to offer in that dialogue, in that conversation. Now, this is kind of fascinating. I'm just going to pick up the story right here. It says, then these are the Epicureans and the Stoic philosophers that he had kind of made a relationship with. They took him and they brought him to a meeting of the Areopagus. Now, I don't know if you know what the Areopagus is. It was kind of like the center. It's like okay, you just got invited into center court of all the marketplace of ideas. And actually, if you're on the Areopagus, I don't know if any of you have ever been to Athens. I haven't been there. But if you stand there, you can look across all of Athens. It's up on a hill, and you can see the Acropolis. It's just a chance to oversee this city. So they go to the Areopagus, where they said to him, "May we know what this new teaching is that you're presenting? Let's exchange some ideas here because we want to pursue what's true. We're skeptical, but we want to pursue it." Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus, and he said, "People of Athens, I can see that in every way you are very religious." I see that. I think we actually have a connection point. I'm religious. I'm going to talk to you about my religious faith here in a second. You're religious. We don't see it the same way, but we're actually kind of craving the same thing. Maybe there's a connect point there. "For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription." There was an altar in Athens, and the altar said, "To the unknown God." Well, this is what the Athenians had done. They had said, we like to think about big ideas, and we want to make sure we cover all of our bases. I mean, we have gods over here that are to the sun and to the stars. Some are built with human hands, and they're made of stone and gold and such. And you know, it's possible that we don't have this all right, or we're missing something, so let's also make an altar to the God that we don't know about yet, the unknown God. I could respect that. So Paul says, this is what I've seen. So, you're ignorant. Now, for us, ignorant is an insult word. Like, if I told you were ignorant in the comments afterward, you'd be like, he's a jerk, right? But ignorant here just means didn't know. It actually goes along with unknown God. Right? He's not calling them a name. He's saying, here's what's happening. This thing that you don't know about, that you're ignorant of, the very thing you worship, this is what I'm going to proclaim to you. And then he begins this conversation. So if you ever have the chance to try to lead someone to faith who's smart, I'd really suggest that instead of starting with your speech and starting with your agenda, you start with some questions. And you go on a little discovery process. You respect and honor someone else's beliefs and seek to understand before you seek to be understood. I can imagine that some of you have missed that boat before, and you're like, yep, that's right, Greg, I need to get that line. And I can imagine some of you who are not followers of Jesus in the room would say, yeah, Greg, keep telling them that works a lot better if you respect me first. And there's kind of a second thing that happens here with Paul. He explores the ideas around a creator. A creator. So this is a very powerful intellectual understanding. There are people who don't believe in any God or creator at all, right? Atheists. And if you don't believe in a creator, if you don't believe in a God at all of any form or any kind, then there are significant implications for what that means for our lives and where we try to find understanding of certain things. The Apostle Paul has not yet gotten to the person of Jesus. He will get to that eventually, but he says, let's start broad and talk about the idea of a creator. And here's what he says. He says, the God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and he does not live in temples built by human hands. He says this. I need to say this to you. Some of you, even who are followers of Jesus, need to get your head around this. Smart people don't worship things that they can create. Stupid people worship things they can create. Stupid people worship money. Stupid people, I don't want to make any of you feel stupid. I'm going to stop the list right there. But smart people understand that if your view of God somehow puts him below you, then he's no God at all. But if your view of God is open to the idea that he's above you, that he's the one directing, that he's actually the source of all things, In philosophy, we'd call this the unmoved mover, the prime reality, the being that existed before anything else existed. I have kids come and ask me from time to time, well, God, if Greg, not God, careful. Oh, man. That's not Freudian, I will tell you. Anyway, back to this. Greg, if God created the world, who created God? Right? Fair question, right? There's only one problem with the question. If you can answer that question, there's another question after it. Right? Whoever created God, then you're going to say, well, who created that? And then who created that and who created that? The question is there anything that's existed always and brought what exists around us right now into existence? Paul, when he writes to the Romans later on, he says they traded the truth of God for a lie. And they worshiped created things rather than the Creator. And here's the challenge. If you want to take an intellectual approach to this, eliminate Creator, eliminate God. And I'm going to ask you to defend your source for any morality, for any sense of right and wrong that is universal. You say, well, Greg, of course, it's got to be wrong to murder somebody. Really? Who says? Who says? How would you know? Those of us who believe in human rights, that human beings have inalienable rights that were given to them by their Creator, those of us that believe that, we believe its source is in the Creator. So it could be morality, it could be meaning. If there is no God, if all you and I are biological pieces of matter that are really sophisticated, then what's the purpose of life? Is there any meaning? What about love? If there is no God, what is love? There are all kinds of things that if you try to construct an understanding of how this world works and you try to do it without a Creator, you lose. So that's where Paul starts. He says, listen, there's a Creator, and it's not a Creator that lives under you. It has to be a Creator that you'll ultimately submit to if you find Him. And then he comes to this next idea. He says, okay, if there's a Creator, then why don't we start to explore the idea of a relationship with God? Because I guess you could have a Creator who is only an energy or only a force, something, not someone, who's impersonal and doesn't care, can't care. I guess that's possible. But you'd have a lot of things to start to figure out. Say, why is it that as a human being, as one of the most sophisticated beings on the planet right now, I care, I love, I experience joy, I do these things? That has to have its source somewhere. What if God isn't just a force or an energy or something impersonal? But what if He's actually a relational God? And this is where Paul goes with these philosophers. This is what he says. He says, God did this creation, so that they would seek Him, you and I would seek Him, and perhaps reach out for Him, and find Him. That God actually put a mechanism inside each of us that causes us to yearn for something more, to yearn for a higher power, to yearn for a greater purpose. And what that is inside of each of us is this homing device to help us kind of look up to God, reach out to God, and find God, because He is not far away from any one of us. Because as some of your own poets have said, he said, I'm not making this up. Your own poets write these kind of things. We are His offspring. What if we're children of God? What if God wants to be known and He wants to know us? What if God isn't a force, but He's a father? He said, that's what I'm going to suggest to you. That this is who God is, and it makes sense of so many things in this world if God's relational. And then he starts to zero in and say, okay, this is all about God. So how does God express Himself on planet Earth? And here's what we start to see. we want to explore the basis of Christianity. Now, I'm leaving the blank for just a second here, because I'm really curious what most of you think goes in that blank right now. When I have conversations with many, many people who are followers of Jesus, Christian, faithful people, in that blank, they'd say, yep, so we have to explore the basis of Christianity. They'd say, the Bible. But the Bible, as beautiful as it is, and I believe in the Scriptures, the Bible, let me be crystal clear about this, is not the basis of Christianity. If your question, let me fill in the blank first. What is the basis of Christianity if it's not the Bible? The answer to this question is quite clear. It is the resurrection. The resurrection of Jesus. If you say to me, why do you believe in the resurrection? And my answer is, because the Bible says so. That's actually a really terrible circular reasoning argument. And I'm going to tell you that I don't believe in the resurrection because the Bible says so. I actually believe in the Bible because I believe in the resurrection. It goes the other direction. Have you ever been in a situation where you were stuck defending the Bible? It's not indefensible, but you can talk about that for hours and hours and hours. How would I know that the Bible itself is not the basis of the Christian faith? Well, I know because all summer long, I'm teaching you about how people came into this powerful, life-changing faith with Jesus Christ, and none of them had the Bible yet. It hadn't even been written at the time of these events that are being described. Now, is it good? I'm not diminishing the Bible. I'm not. But my question, if I'm talking to someone who's smart and they're struggling with faith, my goal is not to see whether or not they will believe the Bible. My question is whether or not you believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And I don't know if you've ever explored the evidence for the resurrection versus the evidence against a resurrection, but I'm here to suggest to you I have, and you would have a very, very, very difficult time suggesting that the resurrection of Jesus Christ did not happen. I can go into a few places of exploration briefly with all of you. All the followers of Jesus who were real bold when he was alive and then got real scared when he died and all hid themselves. Peter, who denied that he even knew Jesus when Jesus died, after the resurrection becomes fearless. Peter would have known. Is this a hoax? Is this wrong? This is history. You don't have to go to the Bible for these sources. This is history. That Christianity spread, just like the book of Acts describes it spreading. That from a sociological perspective, just a social science perspective, it is impossible to put together a reasoning for why Christianity spread the way that it did. It's a sociological phenomenon. And my suggestion is that because they saw a man rise from the dead. That Jesus really did rise from the dead. And if you're a person here today who's not a follower of Jesus and you're kind of on the intellectual side of things, this is the pursuit I want you to take. To explore whether the resurrection is true or whether it isn't. Here's how Paul started to talk about it. He has given proof of this to everyone by raising Christ from the dead. Now, when the Epicureans, when the Stoics heard about the resurrection of the dead, some of them sneered. That's what people will do. If they weren't eyewitnesses to it themselves, some will sneer. They just won't believe it. But others said, let's keep this dialogue going. Let's talk about this some more because Christianity at least belongs in the arena of reasonable ideas, of worldviews that make sense. And in fact, your worldview, Paul, might even make more sense than the one I walked into the room with. So let's keep the conversation going. I want to give you 3 resources before I wrap this up today. Some of you are readers, all right? Here's 2 books for you. There's a book called Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. It's a classic. It's been around for close to 100 years now. If you're a person who thinks philosophically, either someone who's exploring faith or someone who's a person of faith and thinks, yeah, I'd like to get my head around this a little bit more. Mere Christianity is a great book. This other book, Letters from a Skeptic, takes a little different approach. Greg and Ed Boyd are father and son. Greg, the son, is a believer. Ed, the father, is not a believer. And that book, if you value kind of the relational dynamics and a dialogue that happens, it's just letters that they write back and forth to one another about discovering the reasons for faith. Maybe both of them, maybe one or the other is the right fit for you today. The other thing that we do at Suncrest, because I highly value this, is an environment that we call Starting Point. And it's going to start next month for us. It's going to go on Sunday nights. You can just come the first Sunday night and decide whether it's the right thing for you or not. Before the band comes out to sing one last song, I'm going to show you a very short video about the nature of Starting Point. But here's what I need you to do. If you're even interested in the notion of, yeah, I need to explore this faith. I'm someone who's either not a follower of Jesus or trying to explore this follower of Jesus, and you'd be interested in coming to a place where you ask your questions. You get to be part of the dialogue. Then I hope you'll come to Starting Point, and the way that you express that tonight is you grab one of those connection cards, you write SP in the box on the back of the connection card, and you can just drop it in the offering bag at the end of the service. Watch this video with me.